So, first of all, I'm going to get this out of the way. I am from the UK, so if I say football, I mean soccer, okay? just to clear it up, and obviously I work for a sports betting company, so I'm going to say that quite a bit. So I want you to sit here for the first sort of part of this talk and think about this question: how many nines are enough? Now, if this means nothing to you, don't worry, it will become clearer later. But for those of you that have got a concept of what this might mean, I want you to just sit and ponder what your companies and what your situation deems to be enough in terms of nines. And there'll be bonus points if anyone can tell me the relevance of that picture to that question. English people, keep quiet. So as John said, I work for Sky Bet. We are based in Yorkshire, England, so not in London. We are a company of about 1,500 people, and we are Britain's most popular online bookmaker. What that means in terms of size, that's about 2 million active customers, 11 million financial transactions every weekend, and roughly 50 million updates to our site every day. What that means is when people come onto the site, we take feeds in from sporting venues and we use those to price up bets that people can place. It's a staggering amount of throughput for our data, and it's something that we constantly battle to keep running at a successful and fast rate. Because obviously if we've got slow feeds, people can see a result happen in a sporting match, place a bet on our site, knowing that that's happened, and we can lose money very quickly. Our biggest day of the year is a day called the Grand National. Some of you might have heard of it. It's the oldest horse race in the UK, and it's the day that basically everybody in the UK has a bet. Your mum, your dad, your grandma, literally everybody will come out of the woodwork to have a bet on this horse race. And as it gets closer to the race starting, the number of bets per second increases. So this headline figure here from this year is our highest ever total. It's about 21,000 bets a minute. And if you consider that the average bet might be about £5, that's about £100,000 a minute in stakes that we're taking. Or if you look at it in terms of our bets per second peak, which is about 450, you know, that's quite about £2.5 a second we're taking there. We have to do this against the backdrop of high availability. One of the things that's made us the most popular sportsbook in the UK is the ease of use of our site, and also the fact that people trust us and they can rely on our service working. So this is a screenshot from our status page. I think I took this last week, and we've managed to uphold 99.99% availability for the last 90 days. I'm quite glad that it was that last 90 days, because prior to that we had a little bit more outage, so it wasn't quite as glamorous looking. But this is something that we take very seriously. Operationally, we are very concerned about being available to our customers, because on days like the Grand National, it makes the difference between someone sticking with you and being a customer for a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, or someone seeing your product down and going to a competitor. It's a very fickle industry, and there's lots of options for people. So I'm going to wind back the clock a bit and sort of say how we started our journey to where we are now by giving a little bit of a story about when it wasn't so good. Boxing Day in the UK is a big day for sport. A lot of people are at home because it's a bank holiday, nobody's at work, and there's a full fixture list for football. That means that literally every team in the Premier League, the Championship, League 1, League 2, they're all playing. There's also lots of horse racing. So this is a really popular day for people to be betting. This is probably our second biggest day outside of the Grand National. And in 2014, we had a really significant issue. We went down for an extended period of time, and it caused us all sorts of problems, financially and reputationally. The problem with this, it wasn't isolated. So we'd been seeing increasing numbers of sporadic outages up until that point. And after Boxing Day, after this period of outage where we'd lost, I would say, several £1 million in revenue, we had some more. So literally 2 days later, the site went down again. And we had to go crawling to our customers to apologise and say, this isn't good enough, I'm sorry, but you can use our desktop site. The problem with this is that 80% of our customers use our mobile app, so this isn't really good enough, as shown by some of the angry tweets that we were getting at the time. So I think it was clear at this point that we'd started to get very much in the centre of this fear cycle. So just to explain what it is, I don't know if anyone's read Michael Nygaard's blog post from a few years ago, but the fear cycle is essentially a process where a small change that you make can lead to some unexpected consequences. It might be a bug that doesn't really affect customer experience, but it might be something more significant. It might lead to an outage. It might lead to loss of revenue. It could be anything. So on the back of that, people start to get a bit more concerned about making these changes. They don't want to be the one that brings the site down, and they certainly don't want to be the one that's having to go into the tech leadership meeting and explain why this little thing that shouldn't have affected the part of the site over here has suddenly started to lose us some money. So what we try and do then is we say, okay, we're not going to look at this thing as a whole. We're going to start to break it down into smaller pieces. And teams focus on localized areas of the code base. Might work to some extent, but realistically what happens there is people start to produce localized, warty, special cases of code. Okay, so stuff starts to go in there that you think, why is this here? This should have been factored out somewhere else. This should be part of the overall application rather than a special case in this little corner of the code base. And then the fear intensifies. What happens next is an all too often told story. These small changes, as localized as they are, they start to make people's lives difficult elsewhere. Things start to go wrong for a different team in a different part of the business. They might not even be in your building. And they're saying, why on earth is our thing stopping working now? What's this bug to do with this change that you've made over there? And at this point, to quote Michael Nygaard, this is the fear cycle. The fear cycle is self-sustaining. Everything that you do starts to have bigger implications, and you just don't know what they are. So you start to fear that change even more. And your delivery times get longer and longer, and the amount of value that you're delivering in each ticket that you put out is smaller and smaller. How do you know you're in this? Well, I think it's fairly obvious. If you're seeing regular outages and you're getting worried about making global changes, it's fairly clear. One thing we noticed was that our stats from our delivery teams were starting to get very strange. They were going longer and longer. So we're quite lucky in that we've got 10% time at Skybet, so people can go and investigate their interest in their own time. So this is a project someone put together in R to pull out all of our stats from Jira. And if you look at some of the teams' work, over a period of time, the mean cycle time, so this is the bit that scared me the most, the mean cycle time goes from around about 5 days to nearer 20. So if you think about that in terms of your working month, 20 days is your working month, and if it's taking you a month to deliver a single ticket, how much value are you actually adding in that time? You can look at your code as well. So I've got an example here from our website, and you can see that it's fairly hairy. Just to go from top to bottom, there's a really nice path here that I was looking at the other day. It goes abstract, concrete, abstract, concrete, abstract, concrete in an inheritance chain. And if that doesn't scare anybody, I don't know what will. Add to that, it's pretty big. It's fair to say that we favoured the inheritance over composition rather than the other way around. Even more worryingly, that abstract page controller class that we've got there was the breeding ground of these warty, knobbly, special cases. Rather than people looking at it and thinking, I'm going to refactor this because I've got this new feature to add, they thought, I can just tuck this method here. Why not? Look at it, it's been done before, I'll just do that. And what happens then is, when some actual change needs to happen that's relevant to that class, it blows up. So this is a change that I made. You can probably tell by the little comments that I'm working in PHP, don't hate me too much. I added a property to an array, and 56 tests blew up. Now that's crazy, right? It's adding a property, it shouldn't do anything like that. So it's safe to say this is poor. Another part of our code base, this is where I spend more of my time, this is in JavaScript. And if anyone's familiar with sort of working with JavaScript, this should frighten the life out of you, because you've got a constructor that doesn't name any parameters, then passes on its arguments to another constructor that it's inheriting from. And the name as well might give you some cause for concern. The abstract animal racing homepage document handler. Yeah, it's wrong on many, many levels. So this quote sums it up perfectly for me. This is exactly how my experience has been working with this code base over time. So what we're going to do, we want to go fast. We want to be delivering value to our customers, and we need to be making change for the business, because that's how we stay afloat. This is how we can maintain our advantage over our competitors. But we need stability at the same time. And to give you some context about the level of stability that we're after, if you want 4 nines of availability, to go back to that question at the start, that gives you 53 minutes a year of downtime. Now that's not an awful lot. That's for the whole app, 53 minutes. And if we look even closer and say, okay, my app, my homepage for Sky Bet, it depends on 15 services. There might be databases or microservices, whatever. That means that if they all provide 4 nines of availability, we're actually getting 99.85%. In the context of our traffic, where we have about 3 billion requests over the year, that equates to 4 million errors, or more realistically, it's an hour of downtime a month. So this is clearly well outside of our area that we want to be delivering of availability. So then how do we start getting out of this? Well, clearly the answer, being at LambdaConf, is that we introduced functional programming. Probably didn't take too much guessing, that did it. But so we started looking at this and thinking, how can we address this? And actually we started looking at things like the Gang of Four's design patterns book. And this is interesting here, because if you take that object out and replace it with function, that kind of says, yeah, this is a good idea that we can start to leverage a bit more. It's amazing because of the simplicity, this idea of composing things from small, well-known bits and bobs. So here, this is the standard sort of composition notation, I'm led to believe. I'm not an academic. But I love this idea that you've got something on both sides where you've got well-defined inputs and the same outputs given that input. And you can just combine them together to have a bigger thing that has known inputs and outputs. You can take this even further than just the code, and we've started to look at it from an architectural point of view to say if we can compose our applications from things that have single purpose all the way through the stack, from the UI components right the way down to the services underneath, can we build our products in a composable way using these ideas? But how do you do this when you can't start from scratch? There aren't many people in an enterprise business, such as the one I work in, that can just go into their boss's office and say, do you know what, we're going to throw away the last 10 years of work and just start again. You have to find a way that you can bring this into reality as part of the existing code base. One of the first things that we did that helped us in this journey was to take a look at the existing attitudes towards running our software, because that's kind of a key part of this, right? So having availability and knowing about the availability traditionally would sit with the runtime teams or the ops teams. And this diagram from my colleague Andy kind of sums it up, that the idea was that you'd have this conveyor belt of architecture to development to test, and then you'd just sort of chuck it to ops and they'd run it and hope for the best. But that leads to this kind of thinking, you know? And this really is probably the root of our problem as well as the overall design of our software. So one of the things that we started to look at doing was how we can bring ops into our teams. So rather than having development teams and ops teams, we disbanded ops and we distributed it into all the squads. So now all the squads that we have are on call for their own software. They've got a list of servers and services that they look after, and they're the ones that are PagerDuty'd at 2 o'clock in the morning to say, your thing's broken, fix it. They're also the ones that get the list of all the security patches that need to be applied, any kind of bugs that have been raised, they go straight to them. They have full ownership of their stuff, and that leads to them giving more of a, I won't swear, they care more about what they're doing and what they're delivering, because it affects them. It's not affecting somebody else that might not even be in the same building, it's affecting them, it's real. But obviously when you're starting this stuff, you've got to be a bit more pragmatic, because you're not going to start rewriting the whole thing from scratch. And when you're trying to introduce something, I believe firmly that functional programming is the right way for us to go because of all the benefits that I've seen it bring. But it's important that you're pragmatic about this, because not everybody is in that same position and not in the same mindset as you. You need to be practical about this. So trying to get away from the academic hand-waving and all the sort of technology terms and things that go along with functional programming, and introducing it gently by showing it working in a real-world environment is the way to go here. And you've got to pick something small, which, when you've got an application stack that looks kind of like this, you know, that little bit is all this stuff, all these databases. You know, it's complicated. So finding the place to start, where can you carve out your bit that you're going to work on, this becomes tricky, okay? So you've got to find a way that you can show the benefits of your approach. And one of the things that we've done was to say, right, okay, we've got existing features that we need to rewrite in this way, but we've also got some opportunities coming up that we could start to put new features into our app that follow this best practice. And I'm just going to show you a bit of information about what we actually did to build a feature called Request a Bet.
Forget anything can happen. In sport, anything does happen. But could it be better? With Request a Bet, it could. Spark your sports brain and roll all the possibilities into one bet. 3 red cards, 7 corners, 5 goals. Let's price that up or browse hundreds of requested bets on our app. The possibilities are humongous. How big is your sports login? Skybet, Britain's most popular online bookmaker. When the phone stops, stop.
So this is something that's quite revolutionary for the betting industry. Forgive me while I give you a rough overview of how betting works. If you know this, I'm really sorry, but if you don't, it's important that you understand it. If you are looking, using football as an example, if you're looking at a bet to place, say, Manchester United to win, and the odds aren't particularly great, you might look to another game that day, say Chelsea, and you say, okay, they're also at a reasonable price, but if I combine those two things together, I will get better odds. So if they're both 2 to 1, if I create a multiple of those bets, it will make it 8 to 1, and I will get, if I put £1 on, I'll get £9 back, including my stake. In a normal betting environment, that only applies when the events aren't linked together. Okay, so if I wanted to place a bet on Manchester United to win and Paul Pogba to score, who's a Manchester United player, hopefully someone's heard of Paul Pogba. Yes, we've got a thumbs up, excellent. They're kind of linked, right? So if Paul Pogba scores, it means the chances of Manchester United winning are increased. So you can't just take those odds and combine them in a straight line way. There's going to have to be some opinion put in there, some model that put in there to give you a price that reflects the related contingency. Request a bet was our answer to this. So we'd been seeing increasing numbers of people asking us for specific bets on the same games. And we thought, well, this is an interesting idea. So we started to build models that allowed us to put in our opinion and put in like a base set of odds, and it would create a whole raft of these concepts of related contingency. So you could actually place this bet of Pogba to score and Manchester United to win. This you can see on here is the sort of the front end app part of it, where you can go in. We have a limited number of markets, we call them, that you can pick from to build these requests, and you can use up to 4 elements of those. So it's basically building an accumulator bet from outcomes in the same game. Now, at the time, this is something that nobody else had done, and it was an absolute market-leading position. The kicker was, when we decided to do this, as with a lot of projects in a big company, we only got given 6 weeks, which, given the previous history of 20 days per ticket, how likely do you think that sounded? You know, we tend to think that we start off with the best of intentions, but often we get closer and closer and the quality suffers. And I particularly love this diagram because I'm a front-end engineer sort of by nature, and it's the front end that's always left to the last minute, isn't it? So anyway, it works on many levels. We knew this product was going to be big. We knew it was going to be a big change to the way that people bet. So we spent a lot of money marketing it. You saw the advert before. We were putting adverts all over the site, around the place. And we were starting to be a bit cocky about the way that people interact with us about it. You can see here, if anyone knows Sunderland, they've not been particularly good as a football club in the last couple of years. So us telling this person that we're not going to raise this price for them because it's not serious, because Sunderland will never win. When you've got that level of confidence about a product, it better work. You know, there's no point having this and it being down. If someone saw that and went to the site and tried to place a request about it and it just didn't work, then we would have all manner of problems reputationally. I guess cutting to the chase, it did work. We managed to deliver this because we embraced some of these ideas of functional programming. I spent a lot of time looking at how we can introduce ideas from people like Brian Lonsdorf and Ian Hoffman-Hicks, et cetera, et cetera. And this product has gone on to be one of our most profitable additions to the site in the last few years. As John mentioned at the start, it's probably in the order of hundreds of millions now rather than tens of millions. It's made a significant contribution to our bottom line. It's also made a significant contribution to our customers. This particular one here, if everybody won, if everyone bet £5 out of these 4,000 people, that means we've paid out £1.6 million on that one bet. So it's quite lucrative. It didn't just make waves with our customers. We won awards for this too. It was seen as a significant point of innovation for the betting industry. Truth be told, this was something that no one thought was coming, and we got it out the door quickest. We held a market-leading position on it for a long time. We're going to be revisiting it again this year to enhance it. This was a big deal for us. It was a big deal for me because I bet personally, that functional programming would deliver this. And reputationally for me, it was quite a risk, but I'm glad to say I'm standing here now talking to you about it, so it clearly was, it was the right risk to take. So let's go through some of the challenges that we had when we were introducing this sort of thinking, this idea of composing functions and building up functionality from the ground up. Initially, it was met with a bit of confusion, and then people were like, yeah, I get this. This is really good. I understand it. Then almost literally the same afternoon, they'd be like, oh my God, what are we doing? This is a terrible mistake. I don't understand any of it. And when you think about that in the context of a wider team, so we've got maybe 100 people in technology in the skybet.com area, that kind of thinking is hard to keep aligned. You know, get people bought into this concept of wanting to follow through with functional programming as the technique that's going to deliver our next generation of website and our new features. Literally at the same time we were doing this, there was another team, the other side of the kitchen in our building, that were going away and they were refactoring their code to be more like PHP and JavaScript using TypeScript. So we couldn't have two teams working in more opposite situations. So this idea of keeping people aligned is very hard. One way through it is to look at how we can educate and evangelize the process. So obviously, I do a lot of talking. I like to go and explain to people why we are taking the choices we've made, why we're going down the route that we're going down. But more often than not, the materials that people are looking at are pretty difficult to get into. You get a very basic overview, and then you're chucked in at the deep end. So we've got to work hard at this. Like I say, one of the things that I do is I go around and make sure that we have sessions on our Friday afternoon 10% times that I can go and teach people about these technologies. But also it's important to keep it light-hearted and break down the barriers and the perceptions that people have about these techniques, that they're too academic, they're too highbrow. So this is an example of a talk I gave. This is in our office where I basically built a bingo machine for terms that make people sort of talk about with functional programming with a JavaScript twist. The irony being I built this in Elm. And basically people got a bingo card, it had the phrases on it, and as we walked through each one coming out at random, they could tick it off and win prizes. So it brought a light-hearted element to it too. My team that worked on this obviously became very proficient in these techniques, but people don't stay around forever. You're going to have new hires that come into your teams, you're going to have people that leave, you're going to have people that want to move to a different team. So you need to make sure that whilst the people that are there at the start and take this journey with you are really obviously going to be competent and bought in, you've got to think how you're going to bring in new people into this world. It's okay to say, just go away and read the code, but it's not really good enough to just leave them there and not explain the context of the decisions that you made. You need to go on and take people through how you got to the decision to use these techniques in the first place, how they came to be, what papers you read, what techniques you've learned, what things you've learned not to do as important as what you are going to do. And then how can you then take that and share it outside of your immediate team? So how can you take somebody, for example, that's been working on a product for maybe 6 months and say, would you like to have 3 months in a different team to try and share these ideas? Looking at this concept, there's all sorts of things that you can do, so it's important to choose the ones that you're gonna do. Brian sums this up perfectly for me because it's all about constraint. If you go and try and boil the ocean, you're not going to succeed. You have to be starting small and picking the right things. We also have to be working within these constraints. Anyone that's worked on a large code base will know that this is an important fact. Code that you've written 6 months later is like code that somebody else has written. You need to be able to make sure that you've got the ease of readability so that you understand it when you go back to it later. Likewise, choosing the tools that you're going to work with is really important because there's so many options, especially in JavaScript. I think that it's got 4 times the number of things that are coming, packages launched every day than the nearest sized package manager system. So think about it very carefully, what you're going to use, how you're going to introduce these things into your code base. This is something that we've suffered from a lot. The not invented here syndrome.
Just stand close to the mic so they can hear you upstairs.
Okay, sorry. The not invented here syndrome is a big problem. So picking something that is well adopted, it's an open source project that's got lots of people contributing to it, is probably the right way to go. even though we're a fairly large company, we don't have the number of people that allows us to have teams like the React team in Facebook that work specifically on supporting internal projects that are used by development teams for the product. So what we try and do now is standardize on a few well-chosen things that are going to support the techniques that we want to do, and hopefully we can support those projects back, either financially through contributing to the people that are core contributors, bug reports, documentation, code contributions, whatever we can do. When you can't get some of these ideas into your products, because it's not always easy to pick small things that are going to be making a difference in the live product, think about how you can make trialing some of these techniques easier. One thing that we do is to put new techniques and ideas to test in UX. So this is an example of our next generation of request to bet, where we're going to be allowing people to see prices as they build things. And we built this as a standalone application in Elm because we wanted to see how Elm fit into our stack and whether it would be something that was approachable for the majority of our developers to work with. This is lightweight. This is something that we can throw away. It's not going to affect anybody, but it gives people a chance to be exposed to those tools and techniques and technologies. But don't go too far, because nothing will put people off quicker than you getting really deep into a rabbit hole of highbrow techniques and new ideas when they're just starting their journey. So it's got to remain accessible, okay? So I'm just going to go back to the beginning and rephrase this opening question. How do we get 4 nines, happy customers, happy developers, and make money? Well, I've given you the answer already. We're going to introduce some functional programming techniques. Pick something small, get it in production, and repeat. The idea that you can build small components that can have predictable input and output and be well tested, it's going to make your life so much easier in the long run, and everyone in your team will thank you for it later. I know that I'm talking to people that already believe this, but it's important to have this. But you've got to think about this in terms of working as a team, because scaling software is hard, but scaling teams is even harder. Our business has been growing at 40% year on year, both financially, customer-wise, and team member-wise. So us being able to continue this path when it's already going against the tide of the traditional ways of working means we have to put extra effort into thinking about how to onboard people, how to educate them and train them, and help them to come along with us on this journey. And then I think most importantly, you have to be able to prove that you're delivering real value through this work. Nothing says this is a success more than financial figures at the end of the month to say, we did this and it achieved this. When we launched Request a Bet, granted people didn't think that we were going to be able to do it in 6 weeks. We actually did it in 5 weeks, which was staggering. But the reports that come in every week from the commercial teams and the marketing teams about the number of people that are using the product, the volume of money that's going through the product, it just stands to show the value in embracing these ideas and putting them in place. Add to the fact that the people that care about the operational quality of the site are sitting there looking at our bug reports, or rather they're not sitting there looking at our bug reports because there aren't any. It means that everybody is saying, okay, there's something in this, we're going to go down this route, this has got real value. So I'm just going to finish off by leaving you with this. It is important to think about the small things because they can make a really big difference. And if you try and take the world in one go, you're not going to achieve it. So make sure that you are thinking about how you can chip away at the general thinking, the problems that you've seen in your companies, and the long-held idea that these big spaghetti OO code bases are the way forward. Start small, show the value, and make the change, and you will reap the rewards. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Nice to very nice.
Do you
want to take questions?
Yeah, there's time for questions if people want to ask some questions. Flo.
So the question, how did you convince management to go ahead with functional programming? Because that's the scariest thing management wants to hear.
So the question was, how did I convince management to go along with functional programming? I think the thing that sort of got it off the ground was that we'd been doing low-level bits and pieces kind of in our spare time and showing that there was real value there, we to ourselves. So when we were pitching this idea, we were very confident. And we've got a very good management structure. They're very trusting. So when we say we think this is going to have something in it, they say, okay, we believe you, prove it. But taking the idea of starting small, we practice Kanban and continuous delivery. So the idea was literally start at the smallest thing possible and put it behind a feature switch and start to roll it out gradually as soon as possible. So we don't bottleneck this stuff, we don't hide it away for weeks and then after the 4th, 5th week turn it on. It's literally within the first few days of working in this way, is there something in live that we can start pointing at in New Relic or in our graphite dashboards or wherever, say, yeah, this is working and it's working as expected and it's performing as expected. Yeah, so it's kind of trust, but also getting stuff live quickly is really, really important.
Could you please talk about how you arrived at Elm?
How we arrived at Elm?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, we're not using Elm in production yet. I've been following it for quite some time because I think it's interesting. We use React as our front-end framework, and we initially started with React writing in a vanilla version of the Flux pattern because we started doing this about sort of 2014. And Redux came along later on, and that was a big thing. And obviously, Redux it takes a lot from the Elm architecture. And so it's sort of the next leap of faith was, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what Elm actually is about. And we started to explore there. And I think the thing that I like about Elm is it follows that idea of constraint. So it gives you enough to be able to get by. And the type system's really good. You get a lot of value out of that. But it's not so wide and scary for people that are not particularly well versed in programming, let alone functional programming, to sort of pick up and start working with. And obviously following along with the React and Redux side kind of thinking means that people can start to translate ideas between the two. But then when they see how the types work, they're like, okay, right, I really get why this pattern in Elm works better than in Redux and React. There's a question over here.
I have a question and a request. My question is what tools, processes, and procedures you use to onboard new engineers to functional programming in your team as you onboarded this whole new paradigm? And then can you go back to the slide of fear? And because I want to take a picture.
Okay. I'll go back to the slide of fear.
The diagram actually.
This one?
Yes, thank you.
No worries. Okay. And the question was, how do we onboard engineers? So this one's really quite broad, and it sort of depends really on which team you're in. It's on the tech lead in individual teams to spend time with new engineers and new hires, walking them through tickets. They pair program a lot of the time to say, this is how we work, these are the concepts that we're working with. We've recently been introducing a concept called the Tech Academy, where we are putting aside training for people that work outside of technology who are interested in coming into the technology teams. And so they go through training on DevOps, functional programming. They're basically courses, a bit like the one I'm going to be giving upstairs after this. And they get introduced to programming as a whole through that, and then they get onboarded into a team later on. And then we also have a graduate academy where people can apply out of university, and they come through and they work with our teams as well. But they also study part-time for a master's degree in, I think it's software engineering from one of the universities around Yorkshire. So there's a variety of different ways. It depends on which team we're going into. So we've got some teams that work on big data that are working more with Hadoop and Spark and things like that. So their techniques are very different to the ones that we will be using for the front end on skybet.com. Sorry, hi.
So if someone wanted to use your experience as proof of valuable production, as in specifically financial value, does Skybet have available some of the information that you shared with us today, the kind of increase that it allowed for specifically from
That's an interesting question. So the question was, do we have any numbers available publicly to share to help people make the case to their own businesses? I don't think we do, actually. unfortunately. I can look into seeing if we can release some things, because I think that would be really useful. Part of the problem we've got at the moment is that we were a private business and we have just been bought by the Stars Group. So we're in a period where a lot of our financial information is locked down. We used to get told everything as engineers every day. We'd get a morning report of how the previous day's trading was. That's gone. So we're kind of in the dark too. But I'll go back and I'll ask and see if we can publish something, because I think that's a really important point that you've made. Yep.
This is somewhat related to the onboarding question. I was particularly interested in, so you were talking about how it's important to get developers not only to read the code, but also to understand the decisions that were being made for you to arrive at that point.
Yep.
Do you have any sort of do you document this in any format, or is it basically down to the tech lead to actually convey that information when someone is onboarded?
Yeah. So the question is, how do we embed context into our work so that people can understand the decisions that went before? Depends who you are, really. So I do a lot of Git diving to start to see which tickets were involved in which piece of work. So you can always match up a change in your code base to a ticket in Jira, and then you can go back and there should be extensive notes on Jira. Any significant architectural decisions we document in Confluence, and we share the links to all of our high-level designs and our impact assessments for changes to the teams. So you can always go and see, we had 3 options here and we chose this one, and this is the reason why. Mainly because later on, like so many things in technology, it might not be possible to do one of the options at that time, but later on it becomes possible, and it's important to be able to go and revisit that. But yeah, and then a lot of it is making sure that the tech lead is explaining stuff, or whoever is working on the code at the time. Pair programming does play a big part in this, because you can sit with somebody that's been in a team for longer or has more experience and explain, yeah, we decided not to build this data structure like this because of why. A lot of our decisions always revolve back to how can we handle the amount of updates to our site and our application, because like I showed at the start with the 50 million number, it's a significant volume of stuff that's going on. So more often than not, our decisions have to be quite pragmatic, because to do something in the ideal way, especially in a browser, would probably lead to it locking up. So we have to have a bit of a balance, and explaining those performance trade-offs is really important. But that's something that people kind of get used to, because they start to think, right, okay, so if I'm firing thousands of updates to this page per minute, how am I going to best handle that?
Got one question.
Hi.
Hey, you gave this request event example as a story of a small, successful project using functional programming that helped to demonstrate the value of the organization. But playing to be like a skeptic or devil's advocate here, one of the things that I would ask is, how was functional programming instrumental in that versus it was a new project, maybe a lot of buy-in, very important to the company, maybe the best engineers on the team, other kinds of exogenous factors. When you try to convince other people that functional programming was a major aspect of the success here, how do you separate those kinds of things?
Okay, so how can we, given that it was a reasonably greenfield project, how can we be sure that it was the functional programming aspect that actually made the difference, rather than just being a new thing overall? Okay. I think we had to just look at the prevailing wind of our product development and how much we were actually achieving, which wasn't a great deal at the time, especially in this area. We have to look at the volume of errors that were being reported to our tooling. So New Relic is what we have instrumenting our front-end site and our infrastructure. And we could see there that there was a big change once we introduced this. Because one of the things that happened, as well as this new shiny request abet thing happening, obviously we delivered that, and then we started to put the ideas into existing features as well. So the rest of the event page now, where you see all the betting opportunities, that's all built in the same way. We then built a new feature to do scores. We replaced our in-play offering recently with the same ideas. And all of these things of just kind of building the momentum that the original thing that we did with request a bet sort of had. I think outside of my teams, we've got people working on projects to do real-time processing of data for responsible gambling, for marketing purposes. And they're also working in similar ways, either with languages like Kotlin. We do have some Scala, We don't have any Haskell yet. I've done my training here, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to try evangelize that. But we've got teams that are working with perhaps the more traditional functional programming toolset that you would be seeing whilst at a conference like this. And it's all just gradually kind of, okay, this is the right thing to do. We're actually, one of our big projects is a Kotlin-based thing, which is taking a lot of the ideas that we had from sort of the functional reactive programming aspect of the front end, and they're putting that in place to build our underlying sportsbook technology. So it's all kind of trickling towards everyone seeing this is working. So it's not just about this, but this was like the headline one because it had such a big impact on our bottom line. I think that's it. Oh, one more.
Who's going to win the World Cup?
Who's going to win the World Cup? Oh, England, of course.